Hello there, and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, where you join me on Castra for what will hopefully be the last time for a little while, because we've more or less, well, I say finished this planet. We've got this planet to what we think is a stable and steady state, where things are going to be able to just carry on ticking over nicely, and we've headed off somewhere else, and if you want to see where that is, you're going to have to come along and join us in the next stream. But getting this planet ready for us to leave has taken a certain amount of work, so let's take a look at that. The first and most important thing is dealing with the data collectors. Now, as you might remember from previous videos, these things gradually produce resources, and that's what's dribbling out along these belts here, and we're currently unloading with these inserters. And that's lovely because it gets us a supply of some of the basic resources we need on this planet. But also sometimes they also produce gun turrets, and then those gun turrets will start shooting at things, anything that's in the area, and usually that means we start losing large quantities of bots, and also it takes chips out of our armour if we go anywhere near them. So we prefer to avoid that happening. Fortunately, the planet also comes with these jammer radars, and these cover a sort of a fairly large area around them. So this one's covering that purple square, the one down here is covering that one. Over here we've got one that's covering this sort of general area, and down here, and so on and so on. So we placed out lots and lots of these jammer radars, and these pacify the data collectors and stop them producing anything that's too military. They also slightly tweak the list of things that are produced by them, so instead of green circuits we get red circuits, and I think some of the other numbers are adjusted a little bit as well. And so Mike has been round and put in these jammer radars by all of the data collectors that are inside our sort of claimed area, and our claimed area is obviously delineated by these walls to some extent, although we've actually also built a bit outside them, and you can tell which ones we've claimed because they go blue on the map. So these ones around here, these are all blue, so we can tell we've claimed these ones with, or pacified these ones with the jammer radars. But these two down here are still potentially dangerous, and if we have a look at them, well, you can see they are spawning in items around them which they're dropping onto the floor, and sometimes there is a chance that they will produce gun turrets as well, although that one doesn't seem to have done. Okay, these ones up here have, so up here you can see that we've got some gun turrets in here. These are still active and dangerous. If we go over here, or if our bots fly over here, if we build stuff over here, it'll get shot up a bit, and we'd obviously like to avoid that happening. So this is what naturally happens to the data collectors if you ignore them, and this is what happens to them when they're fully pacified. Now, we could go around and clean out some of these walls if we wanted to, but it's not worth it. There's not really any point, because we can unload them reasonably effectively. The other big difference with the pacified data collectors is that instead of just dropping items around themselves like the normal blue ones do, they actually will stock anything they produce inside them. As you can see along here, we've got some data collection happening, and then eventually they'll produce a thing like that, which will then be unloaded by this inserter. And so Mike and Sophia, with a little bit of help from myself and Tristan, have gone around putting in these inserters by all of the data collectors, and they've all been programmed to run until there's 10,000 of the battlefield science packs somewhere in the logistics system. And we'll take a look at where those go in a moment when we look a little bit further down the pipes. This means that we can be sure that these things will carry on being emptied. They'll still produce the resources we want, and they'll be unloaded and put onto the belt, but we have some protection against the belts jamming up completely. And so all the resources flow out of the data collectors. Some of the battlefield data is brought in here, turned into science packs as the tanks are delivered, and they're also dropped onto the belt, where they'll be bimble away merrily along here, and eventually they'll get back into the main part of the factory over here. Around here we have a large sorting system, as we've touched on before, and if we have any excess bits and pieces, they'll be recycled one way or another and turned into useful things that we can use elsewhere. But the most important thing that's coming in here is the science packs. You see there's loads of them flowing in here, and those will come along here. They'll be put into these blue chests and then immediately unloaded down here. They can also be passed through a down binner if required. But yes, they'll be passed down here, and then they'll come along here to fill up all of these chests to go into the rockets and be taken off to the spaceships to be taken over to Norbis for science. Now, these chests, we're going to let them fill up until they're completely full. Once they are completely full, then the belt will start to back up along here, as belts do, and eventually it'll get to the point where it blocks up these inserters and they can't unload anymore. At that point, the science packs will build up and up and up in these yellow chests until they finally get to 10,000 in the chest, which will easily fit. You can fit almost 10,000 in either chest, so between them, there's plenty of room there for those. And then once they hit 10,000, that's when the circuit conditions I was talking about earlier on these inserters will kick in, and they'll stop unloading. And that means these things will just fill up and up and up. And the important thing about that is it means we won't just jam up this belt all the way along here with science packs. It'll just all come to a stop, and things will calm down a bit. Now, it occurs to me that it doesn't make a great deal of difference whether things calm down and come to a stop or not. Either the belt will jam, in which case eventually these will all stop unloading, or these will stop unloading because of the circuit conditions, at which point the belt will stop running anyway. So actually that's probably not necessary despite the amount of stuff we have pouring out down here. I just hope that if we do stop producing science packs that we're going to be able to produce all of the other things we need on this planet. But I think it should be okay. We're going to have enough of a backlog of just about everything that I'm sure things will carry on running without any problems. An additional defensive system that we can also use on this planet is the combat roboports, and that's these guys over here. And Mark has been playing with these and getting a number of them set up and making sure they work. And you can see the range on this one, we have a red square to show us the range as opposed to the purple square on this one, so it's a slightly shorter range. But the idea is that if this combat roboport detects any enemy buildings within its range, then it will start launching out combat drones, which will fly out and start beating up anything they see. These are not particularly effective against turrets because the turrets don't move into their range, and if you put them down inside the range then you have the whole sort of loading time and worries, and the turrets will probably take them apart before they've actually managed to do anything useful. But in theory, if we get any new turrets spawning in around here, perhaps because these jammer radars fail, then with any luck these combat roboports will be able to deal with them reasonably quickly. We also have suspicions that we may get another type of attack later on, which we're trying not to look into too much because of spoilers, but in theory something could happen. So we'd like to be vaguely ready for that. So we've got a number of these combat roboports scattered around, and they're the slightly darker blue squares. They're mostly on the outside of the factory, so we're hoping that if anything comes in from these other data collectors over here, if anything sweeps in, then we'll have at least some defences before things all go horribly, horribly wrong. Eventually, even if things do go horribly, horribly wrong, those enemies will presumably come up to these walls over here, where we then have various turrets along here that will hopefully be able to take them apart and make sure our factory is kept safe. Because Mike quite likes numbers, he's done a bit of research into what's the best type of drone to use with these combat roboports. And we have three options. There are the Defender capsules, which cost quite a lot of iron. They take 12 iron gear wheels and then some piercing round magazines, which actually don't take iron on this planet. They take nickel, but they do take steel and copper, so we have to worry about that. And that produces 4 Defender capsules. And when you fire off a Defender capsule, it produces a single Defender drone. And that Defender drone does currently 24 physical damage at a speed of 7.5 per second. Next up is the Distractor capsule, and that takes in some Defender capsules, and then additionally it takes in a battlefield data packet. Or alternatively, you can do it the other way, which takes in some red circuits and some Defender capsules. And that produces Distractor capsules, which are different. Those do 34 laser damage, 4.8 times per second, but launching these creates 3 Distractor drones. The third type is the Destroyer capsules, which take again 16 Distractor capsules to make, but that makes 4 of them. So each time you go up a tier, it effectively costs 4 times as much. And when you launch one of these, it creates 5 Destroyer bots, and the Destroyer bots do electric damage, and they do 58 per shot, 3 times a second. So they all do both different types and different amounts of damage, and you get different numbers of drones flying out when you launch them. But the second tier costs 4 times the first tier, and the third tier costs 4 times the second tier, plus a bit of extra battlefield data packets. But we've got loads of those, so that's not a problem. The other thing to then consider is what you're going to be attacking and what sort of resistances they have. And based against the enemies we expect to see on this planet, that brings us to 27 damage per second for the Defenders, the first tier, 1.92 for the Distractors, because they've got really, really good laser resistances, and just over 50 damage per second for the Destroyers, the third tier ones. And so that suggests that the Destroyers, the tier 3s, do twice as much damage as the Defenders, the tier 1s, but cost 16 times as much to produce because of the 4 times multiplier each time you go through. You do get 5 of them launched per capsule, but even then, it's only doing 10 times the damage of the Defender, but costs 16 times as much, and so isn't worth using in this instance. The other thing to consider is that you can actually get more of the Destroyers launched because you get 5 for each capsule compared to the Defenders, because there's presumably a certain number of capsules that the towers can launch. However, I think it comes down to the point that we don't really expect these to be used. The Defenders are far cheaper than the Destroyers, and they only do a little bit less damage, so they're a better one to go for, which is why we have in the end gone for the cheap old Defender capsules in these systems. And we'll see how they get on with those. Now, it is possible that we'll see different enemies in the future other than the ones we're expecting, and then maybe that'll change the rules and we'll have to rethink things and then do something a bit different. To be honest, I'm sort of hoping, for the sake of interest, that something fairly spectacular is going to happen on this planet at some point in the future when the evolution gets to a certain level, and we're going to have to come back here and do some rethinking of things, because I think that would be rather interesting and make the planet a little bit deeper and more subtle than it has been so far. The exact amount of damage will also change over time as we do more and more researches. However, I suspect that the numbers are going to stay reasonably proportional to each other, and so I don't think we need to worry about that too much. In an attempt to find out what happens if you try and get the most advanced enemies that we possibly can, Tristan put in an enormous number of radars over here, because on Castra the pollution is data which is released by radars and roboports. So this is like having an enormous area of mining and burning of coal and all that sort of stuff on Norvis. And if I turn on the data or the pollution map, you can see there is an enormous splodge of dark blue over here where we're trying to generate as much pollution as we possibly can. And we're hoping that this data collector here would then do something a bit more interesting, because if you look at the numbers over there on the right hand side, you can see all the stats for the bits and pieces it's producing, the electronic circuits, advanced circuits and so on, and at the bottom of that is a battle tank. There's a 4% chance of producing a battle tank if you've got 1,000 data to consume, and this level of pollution, there is 1,000 data in this spot here, so it should, as far as we understand, be able to produce a battle tank. However, we watched it quite carefully, and it hasn't. It's carried on producing normal standard Castrian resources. If I turn off the pickup instruction there, you can see we've got the red circuits and the low density structures and the millerite and so on. All of these things are very, very standard. We didn't see any battle tanks appearing here, and certainly nothing came over to attack us. We didn't even see any turrets appearing, which is a bit odd and just goes to suggest that I don't fully understand how this planet works. However, I think we're fairly happy to leave this as it is, maybe leave these running. Possibly we should remove these radars to reduce the amount of pollution on this planet, or maybe we'll do that once we've had an attack and things get a little bit scary, or once something comes in and just wrecks the whole area over here. I don't know exactly how it's going to go. It's going to be very exciting to find out though, and I'm sort of looking forward to it in a slightly concerned way. Additionally, in order to help us leave the planet, Mark has put in a planet hopper over here, so we can now escape relatively easily, and we use that to head back over to Norvis before we went off to the next planet. Additionally, after doing some research, we decided that we could start making various types of rockets over here, and so Tristan has set up a little area over here where we're making various types of missile. So here we're making the yellow rockets in order to make the blue rockets, and the blue rockets are the ones we expect to actually use as our standard weapon on this planet. And then he's also making the atomic bombs because, you know, why not? They're going to be fun. Let's have some enormous explosions. We've not used these very much yet, but we did find the first one we fired off was a bit disappointing. It did a lot less damage than we expected, and also has quite a large splash damage area radius of scariness. So I think we're probably mostly going to use the blue rockets. These are the ones that I believe we discovered on Corundum, and they're like a sort of a combination of a yellow rocket and a red rocket. You get all the damage from the impact of the rocket smacking into whatever the thing is, but you also get quite a lot of splash damage from the explosion. So these are quite effective and quite dangerous, and I think these are what we're going to be trying to use mostly for defense on this planet. In order to keep the defense working well, we have some Spidertrons, so we've colored them all in our colors, and we can grab them, we can load them up with rockets. As you can see here, we've got a nice healthy supply of the blue rockets here, and even though I'm on another planet, I can still grab control of this Spidertron. This is a very slow Spidertron, so we'll speed it up a little bit in the edit here for you guys, so you're not waiting for quite as long. And we'll just demonstrate how this works by bringing it over here and attacking these data collectors. So I've got the Spidertrons out here. It can do well. It can fire lots and lots of rockets off at quite a rate. This doesn't seem to be doing as much damage to the data collector as I was hoping. They obviously have a very... Yes, they have... There we go. If you look on the right-hand side there, you can see that these things have a 95% explosion resistance. And so all my blue rockets are doing about 5% of the damage you'd expect them to. That's a bit pathetic. We do also have personal laser defences in the Spidertron, but we have a 90% laser resistance on the data collectors as well, so they're not doing much either. So Spidertrons are perhaps not the best thing to have on this planet for going out and dealing with these. Our best bet would be something that has a machine gun, so perhaps we should have left some tanks out here. And I should have driven one of those out and used those to attack, because then we'd have been able to do a lot more damage, especially using the green ammunition, which we have plenty of on this planet. The other possibility would be to bring over a turret and drop it in here with using the robots. And also it's going to need some ammunition, so we'll drop some of that in as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if the robots are able to place and arm this turret before the Spidertron is able to kill this data collector. That's how ridiculous the resistances on these things are. Now, I do understand them having quite a high laser resistance, because you don't want to accidentally destroy them with your PLDs when you run past one. But even so, this does seem a little bit excessive. Ah, there's the turret. And sometime later we should get some ammunition as well. Here we go. Right, so now we've got actual bullets being used on this thing. You can see that we're killing it enormously quicker, and boom, there it goes. So they can be killed, but the Spidertrons are a little bit ineffectual against them. This also explains why the nukes seem quite so pathetic. It once again is the huge amount of resistance to explosive damage. Now, I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me try and kill another one of these things. It's a bit ridiculous. It takes forever. We don't care. So, let's get on with look at something else. As part of making the nuclear bombs, Tristan decided it'd be a good idea to put it into a Coverec system. So that's been dropped in here. As you can see, we're pulling in the dull uranium as it goes past. And we've got a little stockpile of the shiny uranium over here that can be used to get the Coverec process running. And then once we've got more than 40 of those in the box down here, we can then pass them up into a red chest, which means they can then be taken away to be made into the nukes. This is also another nice use of the diagonal inserters, allowing us to loop the U-235 out and back into the centrifuge with only a single chest and no faffing with belts. We don't have a lot of nukes, as I say, and they're not enormously effective, so we'll probably not make a great deal of those. But we do at least have a decent amount of uranium-235 available now, should we need it for something else. We've still got plenty of U-235 coming down to be made into nuclear fuel, straight from the basic ore centrifuges, and that's despite Tristan stealing a load to get the Coverec system started, so I'm not worried about our production rate there. The other factor in leaving a planet to get on with it and just leaving it to its own devices and neglect is making sure that all of the resources it's using are under control. And I talked last time about how we've been playing around with the corundum hydrogen sulfide processing recipe, which produces a bit more water per sulphur than the Castra one, because at that time we had loads and loads of sulphur that we didn't really know what to do with, and a bit of a shortage of water for getting the nuclear plants over here up and running. Since then, the things have swung in completely the opposite direction. We managed to rip through all of the sulphur and seem to have plenty of water. So if we look in the tank up here, you can see this is full up to 15,000. And that's good. It means we're full on water, but that means we now have a bit of a shortage of sulphur. You can see the belt taking it away over here is now empty. And so we've set up some systems to try and keep things in balance. We're allowing the sulphur to be sent away over here whenever there's less than 15,000 water. So as we're using the water up for making sulphuric acid, or for electricity, or for anything else that uses water, we'll run the standard Castra recipe, which produces some water and a decent amount of sulphur. And then when we've got a decent amount of that sulphur, then to the state that we don't think we need any more of it for the sulphuric acid over here, we can then let some of that go away down the belt, and I'll show you why later. And if we have a real problem, then down here we can turn this belt on if there's less than 10,000 water, because that means we're actually starting to run out of water, and that will kick in the new corundum-based system, which we've got an enormous amount of down here. So this will produce lots and lots of water very, very quickly, and suddenly refill all of the tanks, and everything should then be okay. It'll also produce a bit of sulphur, which we can pass through and dispose of up this way, but mostly it'll then produce a large amount of water and in order to get everything back up and running nicely again. Mark has put quite a lot of work and thought into trying to get all of this built up and making sure everything is going to stay balanced and working appropriately, and I think it should all be okay. We do now have multiple different ways of producing the resources from different planets, and also we're trying to make them all sort of work in tandem, which is probably not the original intent of the mod author, but we've had this weird thing where we've swung back and forth between needing lots and lots of sulphur or needing lots and lots of water at various different times and having lots of different problems. And so I think having both of these available is going to be quite good for our sanity and reassurance. As an additional sink on the water production, we've switched back over to using the Igrian pump jacks. These are the magic pump jacks that take in water as a fuel and then produce twice as much of whatever it was they're making. They essentially have a really high productivity. As you can see there, it's 310%. Compared to the 210% on a normal pump jack. And they also provide a valuable sink on the water supply, and the more of a sink we can put on the water, then the more sulphur we can pass out downstream to the next system, which I'll show you in a moment. Mark has of course still got this running through a pump here, which is checking to make sure that we have at least a decent amount of water over there, and then we'll only run if we have a plentiful supply of it, in whichever tank it is that's being read. The other resource related thing is over here, where we're producing iron, and this is a bit of a weird one, because we're trying to produce iron in multiple different ways, and yeah, it's all a bit funny. You might remember that during the last video, we were producing significant quantities of molten iron here, by ripping through huge quantities of millerite, and producing lots and lots of nickel, most of which was being recycled, and that's felt kind of wasteful. Also, we kind of backed up along here with the iron plate production, because we're using the molten iron, because that seemed like it was going to be a more efficient way to do things. However, it turns out that that's nonsense. These systems produce 2 molten iron per millerite they process, which means you need to churn through about 5 millerite in order to get 1 iron plate. Now it's a little bit funnier than that, because you've got the productivity bonuses on the foundries and the foundries down here that turn the molten iron into pipes and cogs. but it's kind of it's that sort of feel. You get a big bonus to the productivity, yes, but you're still getting through several millerite for each iron thing that you want to make. Alternatively, there's this recipe over here which turns 1 millerite into 2 iron plates, so you're starting off producing 10 times as much iron in the first place. Now, as I said, that's reduced a little bit because we've got the productivity bonuses on these machines and the productivity bonuses for the foundries down here, sure, but even so, that's such a big advantage that you're never going to quite catch up. And so you kind of want to be running these machines to produce your iron if you can, because then you don't get through as much millerite. You also don't produce quite as much nickel, but we have plenty of nickel. Nickel is not a problem in this factory, but the rate we can bring the millerite in kind of is. However, this system requires sulphur, and so that's how we manage to get through all of our sulphur very, very quickly. However, this system over here produces sulphur. Now, it doesn't produce very much of it, but it does mean that we can run these two banks together and use up the sulphur that's produced on the left-hand side on the right-hand side in order to produce a bit more iron. And I've put a certain amount of effort, and actually I say effort, it's mostly been a certain amount of faffing during the stream into trying to get this system balanced so that it's producing a decent amount of iron even when there isn't any sulphur coming in, and that's mostly meant putting in more and more and more foundries up here, and also trying to keep the sort of, and also more and more and more of these machines as well. And between them, it does kind of work. We're producing a reasonable amount of iron plate, which can then be taken away to wherever it's needed. So over here for making the gears in order to make the tanks, and then down here in order to make the gears and the pipes in order to make the engine units to go into the tanks. We do also have an amount of that molten iron coming through here, where it's then being used to make the pipes and some gears down here, although we have quite a lot of gears coming through. And we have a funny system of prioritization scattered around on all of these inserters to try and make sure that things get used up in the right order. So in theory, and ideally, we'll use up the iron plates first. So they're coming in down here. We're making the iron gears and the iron pipes. They're going up this belt, and when they come around here, and there is a priority input on this splitter that makes sure we use the stuff that comes from the plates first. But we'll top it up with the stuff that's coming from the molten iron if we have a shortage. Okay, great. And we're doing exactly the same over here where we're making the gears. The gears are being made up here with these assembly machines, and then if we have a shortage of them, then we can top up with the ones that are coming out of the foundries. So we are trying to use up the iron plates that are coming out here as a priority, and then using up the molten iron as a sort of a secondary. And so this, once again, should sort of self-balance itself, because if we have too many iron plates, then they'll get used up first, and eventually, well, this system will sort of jam up a bit, and we'll stop producing the molten iron, but we'll carry on producing the iron plates until, and if they all disappear, and we have a shortage of those, then we can start making things from the molten iron, which means we'll start making sulphur over here, which means this system can kick back in again. It's all a bit of a tangled web, but in essence, the system does seem to be working, and we are producing the tanks just about fast enough. There's actually more than 10 in this box at the moment, which may be a record, and those are being taken away, as you saw before, to be made into the science packs. Making iron this way requires enormous amounts of copper. As you can see, we've got basically a full belt flowing in here. Granted, half of it's going off over here to be made into ammunition, but we've got quite a lot flowing in here to be made into the iron plates here. And if we look into this, you can see that it takes 4 copper plates to make 2 iron plates. So that's not great. We're getting through 2 copper for every single iron plate that comes out of these. So that's chewing through a lot of copper there. And so, in order to improve things a bit, I put in another copper feed from the top, and that's coming in from a new mine that's put in over here. And this was just a copy-paste job. I put in a load of mining drills that are pulling a load of copper ore out of the ground, feeding along here to be crushed and then smelted. Any sand that comes out of the crushing process is then being recycled down here, so we're just obliterating it. That's fine. That's what we want to do with it. And then we have large amounts of copper that can flow down a long, long belt over here and go into the system to be made into more iron, which is a weird way to look at things, but apparently that's how things work on this planet. This, as I say, has taken quite a lot of fiddling and faffing, but we are eventually producing a decent amount of the battlefield science packs. If you look here, over the last 10 minutes, we made 500 per minute, which is slightly more than 9 per second, and that's way over our target rate. So Castra's science production rate is absolutely fine, it's absolutely fantastic. We've got plenty flowing through here, and I don't have any problems with that. Oh, and when you count in the slightly higher quality ones that are being made, and then down-binned down to standard quality, we're making well over 10 per second, so I think that's definitely going to be fine. Either that or Mark's going to make us go around all of the other planets and try and upgrade everything to 10 science per second. As a final note, I also dropped in some extra blue chests around the place to make sure that all of the red circuits that are coming in along, like that one, coming in along the disposal belts, are being taken somewhere sensible. So they're being brought over by bots, dropped into here, and then passed out along the belt down here to be used in some sort of useful way further down the system, possibly for making science packs. And so with that, I think Castra is basically ready for us to leave it alone for a little while. The rocket launchers are going ahead as expected, the science is building up, we have all the resources we need over here, we've got a steady supply of the belt parts building up and the forges, so we can take away whatever we need from this planet and use it elsewhere as necessary. I hope you found that interesting, and the whole iron and sulphur process that I was talking about earlier hasn't been too confusing and too horrible to listen to. And if you've got any questions about it, well, come along and join us on Monday at 7:30 PM UK time, when we'll be doing another Planetary Pioneers stream, and I'll be able to talk to you some more about that. If you fancy giving the mod pack a go yourself, you can grab it from the Factorio mod portal and install it. That'll give you all the planets and all the quality of life mods we're playing with, and let us know how you get on with it on the Discord server. I'll be back on Wednesday to play some more Foundry. That's getting quite close to the end now, so there might not be many more weeks when I can say this, but it's going really well. I'm very much enjoying the game, and I'm looking forward to the new features they're going to be adding into it fairly soon in the future. These videos will be coming out Thursday and Friday as usual, so keep your eyes open for them. There'll be a Foundry one coming out tomorrow, for example. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on anything. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.